cricket in the Olympics for the very first time? Does it work?
Well, I think, one thing what is very interesting about the Olympic movement historically is that it has remained extremely relevant to changing times. If you see the Olympic program has been very dynamic in nature. You saw breaking in Paris. You saw sport climbing, which is quite interesting, skateboarding, and then, the Olympic program has kept itself very relevant to the youth, and cricket obviously has captured the imagination of a large number of people across the world. In terms of the amount of people who watch this sport. I mean, of course, it's predominantly from the subcontinent, but the subcontinent in itself is how many billion people. So it is very hard for it to not keep that into consideration. Of course, it will be very interesting to see how the sport develops. I think it's only the second time. I mean, in contemporary history, we can even say it's the first real time in contemporary sport that it's been part of it. I think the Olympics have to remain a very, very prestigious event for the cricketing fraternity. I think that is important. If it ends up being something like a certain other sports where it is important for nations, but they would rather choose a World Cup over cricket, over the Olympics, then the prestige kind of drops down, and I really hope that doesn't happen. It's to be seen how it develops, but I'm sure that because I think in LA there will be only 6 odd teams competing at LA, so I'm sure that it will be 6 of the best national teams competing. A lot of the other nations who would probably qualify. The Olympics is very embedded in their culture, in their country, say in Australia or the UK. It is really embedded in their society, and the importance that they give to the Olympics is massive. So I'm quite confident that it will be a very competitive tournament, for a competitive event, with all their teams putting their absolute best foot forward.
You have spoken about, during this conversation, you did speak about how Olympics truly tests an athlete, Abhinav, which leads me to this question of, Vinesh Phogats. Very heartbreaking, yes, you saw it up close, but what's the biggest learning from this episode?
Well, of course, it was heartbreaking. There's a human side of it, and it was heartbreaking to see her go through it. She's a very resilient individual. She's gone through a lot on and off the field of play. She did magnificently, and then to wake up that next morning and to realize that she's been disqualified is obviously painful, and it is an extremely heartbreaking moment. But when you keep emotion aside, and I think to be able to, it's also at some point of time you have to keep emotion aside if you want to reflect. I mean, at the end of the day, the rules stand very clear in sport. I mean, if there are no rules, you can argue the rules are good or bad. That is something that's a fair argument to have. But when you are at a starting point and you signed off on a set of rules which are to be enforced equally for all, then it becomes almost impossible to kind of get any relief from that. And that was very, very clear that there is no zero tolerance for that. It very clearly mentioned that there will be 2 weigh-ins. So from that perspective, it is what it is. What the sport of wrestling does going forward, that is another question to be asked. Again, I'm not an expert in wrestling. They probably made these rules with a certain thought process as well, I'm sure they have their own perspective on why they've made these rules. So I think it is important to understand every side of the story. But of course, from an athlete to an athlete, from a human to another human, is the most heartbreaking moment we all encountered. And you know, she's a great athlete. She has all our respect, and then I hope she is able to recover out of this very heartbreaking moment. This is not easy to come out of, and frankly, nobody can do it for you. It is only time which can be a healer. And I hope that through the passage of time, she finds some motivation again to try and compete again. But again, it's really up to her.
That's right. It's been that was one friction point. One of those moments that came out from the games for India. But if I had to ask you to look back at that campaign and sum up, what was probably the biggest positive that India can take away from it? What would that be for you, Abhinav?
No, I won't name any of the 6 individuals who ended up with medals. They're all heroes, they've done magnificently. But I think the biggest positive was 2 counts. I think our athletes on the whole were far more competitive than ever. I haven't seen an Olympic team from India being so competitive around. Does that stop us? The next question is that good enough? Probably not.
Yeah.
But you also have to acknowledge what has gone well. All around, I think the athletes' general performance in terms of competitiveness across wide disciplines was great, and then was more competitive than ever before. I think what was also very interesting to see and gratifying to see was just the general interest that the Olympics are generating. I think it's fair to say that we are no longer a one-sport nation.
Right, but since you mentioned this about athletes giving it their all and fighting hard, and that's this edition saw that. I have to put this by you. I have to pit you here against someone like Prakash Padukone, who right after the game said he felt a lot of the players didn't step up when they really had to. What are your thoughts? Do you agree with that?
I appreciate his perspective. I'm not saying that what he said is anything wrong. I mean, I think there are 2 elements to it. I think one element is that sport can never be scripted. There is going to be always a there's always going to be an element of gray in terms of getting the job done. Having said that, I agree with him that accountability is important. It's absolutely critical, and athletes too need to be accountable, as with everybody else. I think when we go out there, it is a team. And I think everybody involved is part of that team. You win collectively and you lose collectively. So I think there's always a time to reflect back. There is always a time to improve, and I think that time is now. Now that the dust has settled on Paris is history. Hopefully this is the last conversation that I'm having on Paris, because I think focus must now shift to LA.
Yes.
And that's the beauty of the Olympic movement and the Olympic cycles. One gets over, and there are Olympic dreams already taking flight the very next hour. So I think the time to reflect is now in terms of everybody involved, whether it be coaches, whether it be the athletes, whether it be the sports staff, whether it be organizations. I think everybody has to take stock, and everybody has to take this collective responsibility on things that have gone well and on things that can be done better. And I think the time for that process is now, and hopefully that will happen.
I have to wrap up, and I can't stop myself from asking you this. One of the biggest stars from the Olympics, of course, was undoubtedly Turkey's Yusuf Dikec. The kind of impact he's had, one of the coolest customers there, and the kind of influence he's had across sporting disciplines. Did you get to watch him, and did you get to meet him?
No, I think it was great for the sport of shooting, for the sport of shooting, which has kind of struggled to be mainstreamed. It was also not being held in Paris. It was being held in Chateauroux, which was difficult. But I think every sport requires heroes. And I think every sport requires characters. That's what makes sport so interesting for people to follow. And it was great to see that happening through him. As a shooter, I didn't really understand what was happening because it was quite normal. Because many athletes are like that in terms of at least pistol lot. Some will not have equipment. Majority have their hand in their pocket. We're a cool bunch of people. The world is just realizing it now.
Of course, Abhinav, I have to take your word for that. From one shooter to another, you set the cool standard way back in 2008. But thank you so much. It's been quite the pleasure speaking to you. A lot of thought-provoking points there from you.
Thank you so much.
Some very, very poignant and thought-provoking conversation that. Some very valid points that Abhinav Bindra made there and something to look back at and take forward too. Well, that does it here on Firstpost here. Hope you enjoyed this very special edition. Of course, regular programming continues as always, where we bring you more updates and news from the world of sports. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.
Climate change is on our doorstep. It's time for a revolution to take root. And it starts with 1.4 billion Indians. It starts with one tree for humanity, one tree for Mother Earth, one tree for our future. Project One Tree, a News 18 network initiative.
Across continents, one powerful news source.
Bringing you diverse perspectives on the issues that matter.
We go beyond the boundaries to give you that little extra about every sporting moment.
So thank you for making Firstpost 5 million strong. We're counting on your support, and you can trust us to bring you the news unfiltered and unvarnished.
On the show today, the T20 World Cup bandwagon has moved across to the West Indies. What can you expect from this?
Hello, I'm Alison Green, coming to you from Durban, South Africa. Today we have a special show.
Start with a report on India's shifting nuclear posture. The first time since India officially became a nuclear power.
Hello and welcome to Firstpost America. I'm Aaron Ham, coming to you live from the nation's capital.